Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. I've had an okay reading week, I would say. Only 2 books to talk about, of which I'm still working on one of them. So, the first book I read this week was The Greeks, A Global History by Roderick. Beaton. This is a history of Greek speakers from their earliest attestation during the late Bronze Age, the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, up through to the present, not only with Greece itself, but also the Greek diaspora. I liked parts of the book, and I didn't particularly like parts of the book. I liked the early chapters, the Mycenaean period, the Archaic period, the Classical period, the Hellenistic period, even the early Roman period. The book started to lose me a bit with the Christianization of the Roman Empire and the Greeks in particular, in part because there's a narrative there that I thought needed a bit more interrogation. There's just something about Constantine and his conversion, or lack thereof, that just, it seemed a bit weird. And throughout these early chapters, there are some references that Beaton uses that I'm not entirely sure about. But the book, for me at least, picks back up with the Byzantines and then the Ottomans, and then declines a bit again with the Greek War for Independence, because from this point on, the book is by and large a rehash of of Roderick Beaton's previous book, Greece Biography of a Modern Nation, with a few passages dealing with Greek speakers who don't live in Greece itself. So ultimately, I think The Greeks, A Global History is a rather mixed bag. There is one thing, though, that I did find rather interesting, and that is, particularly in the early chapters, there's discussion of what I think it's called a systems collapse, where a system that had for decades, centuries, managed to sort of provide solutions for various crises that had confronted it, that by a certain point, those solutions, enacting those solutions, became so expensive for the civilization as a whole that it just, why bother? And that led to collapse, which is essentially his argument for what happened to, or I guess one of the arguments or theories to explain the late Bronze Age collapse, when a whole number of civilizations across the Mediterranean and Near East basically fell apart like so many dominoes, and also perhaps explains a bit of why part of the Roman Empire sort of experienced something similar. So I thought that was kind of interesting, although maybe a bit more could have been done with that, or maybe I just need to really look into if there are any books that actually discuss that in more detail. So anyway, so that was The Greeks. So I decided to pair the Greeks with the Persians. So I also read Persians. The Age of the Great Kings by Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones. This is a history of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and more specifically the dynasty that controlled it. So the book is divided into 3 sections. The first part is the foundation of the empire through the reign of Darius I. Then there's a middle section that basically steps away from the narrative history and looks more at the sociological, cultural, governmental sort of history outside of a narrative history. It's basically in info dumping chapters that I think really don't do the book any favors, but I'll get to that in a second. And then the third part resumes the narrative history, starting with the death of Darius and pretty much the rest of the dynasty until the conquest by Alexander. So, much like with the Greeks, I have mixed opinions about this book. I do think Persians, The Age of the Great Kings, is a much needed sort of reassessment of the Persians. For too long, all of the sources were Greek or were based off of Greek sources, and this book finally gives the Persians an ability to speak for themselves. So that's definitely very positive. But Llewellyn-Jones does spend quite a bit of time sort of defending the Persians, where some of their actions, even if fair for the period, are indefensible. And of course there's this middle section that it just craters the text. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure what you can do with those kind of chapters, because they never work. I mean, they're necessary to give greater context to the history being told, but it basically, you step out of the narrative and it's basically like an extended info dump if you read science fiction and fantasy. Basically, there are sections where you need like world building information, and there's no real organic way of doing it except for just info dumping it. And so these chapters feel that way. And maybe they could have been better like interspersed throughout the narrative history, but for what it is, it does crater at that point. So yeah, I like it, but at the same time I'm not loving it. It's an okay history of the Persians. So, but I will talk a bit more about that Persians tomorrow, or not tomorrow, next Friday, because I'm still working on it. I should finish it tomorrow. I've got a little less than 90 pages, I think. So, after I finish the Persians, I will be starting a reread of Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. This is the first volume in an epic fantasy series inspired by medieval Africa. It's about a young man who has the ability to find missing things and people, and he is hired alongside his ex-lover to find a missing boy. The two, as well as a number of other characters, go in search of this boy. They find him, they return him to his mother, and then later the main character goes in pursuit of this boy again and the people who've kidnapped him to seek revenge. The book is told in a sort of a split narrative that can be at times difficult, but once I think you kind of cut through it, it's rather a sword and sorcery tale of revenge. But it's been a while since I've read it. I've wanted to reread it for a few months now, so kind of looking forward to getting around to it. So that'll be pretty much for most of this next reading week. If I do finish it before next Friday, I'll probably read some poetry or find something relatively quick that I can read and finish before Friday when I start my July reading project. Now, about my July reading project, so the first part of July I'll be reading American literature, which I'm kind of calling my Reading America project. So my original plan was to read one or two works of history, 2 novels, 2 poetry collections which are quite sizable, and a drama anthology. I've been rethinking that sort of scheme. So far, the history I've been reading, I'm not loving it, and I'm a bit, I don't know, maybe sour with my history reading lately, and I'm a bit more enthusiastic about fiction again, although that could just be I loved Girl, Woman, Others so much that I'm like, it's propelling me into wanting to read more literary stuff, or basically the return of the English lit major, you could say. So I might, instead of reading history next month, or at least early next month, I'll be doing 3 novels, 4 poetry collections, and still sticking with the 1 drama anthology. And I'll talk a bit more about that Thursday and next Friday, because quite a few of those books are being hauled. I've got a slew of books right there. That's where I have my new acquisitions until I haul them at the end of the month. And as usual, it's immense. Which I'm enjoying it, but anyway. So I'll do the TBR during next Friday's weekly reads, instead of be July 1st. I'm not entirely sure what I'll start off with, but I'll decide then. So my filming schedule for next week, I'll probably try to do at least 2 tags, maybe try to do a discussion video or something. It all depends, because I don't know whether or not I'll have to be watching the 4 Children of the Apocalypse, or my 2 nieces and 2 nephews, or going over there during a filming period. So the reason why I didn't make any videos yesterday on Thursday was because I had the 4 Children of the Apocalypse over while my brother and sister-in-law went to a doctor's appointment. The 4 Children of the Apocalypse will soon be 5. So they were in the last month and change of my sister-in-law's pregnancy. So she's so basically the doctor's appointments will be coming quite heavily the next few weeks. So we had the kids over for a few hours, and then I'm not entirely sure what next week's going to look like as far as watching the kids and other things. So there might be a few videos, but maybe not every day. Not that I make videos every day anyway, but anyway, so we'll see how that goes. But I know I want to do at least 2 tag videos, and I want to try to get a discussion video in there. But of course, there's also my June book haul, which I'll do on Thursday, and then of course weekly read. So that's my plan for the coming reading week. I have been doing some cooking lately, and some baking, and I did want to show some of what I've been up to regarding that. Once I get my... Where are my images? There we go. Oh, I didn't take a picture of my... Did I? I don't think I took... No, wait, I might have taken a picture of my... No, I didn't. Well, drat. So, I did a peach cobbler earlier this week. It's turned out pretty good. So, the recipe calls for canned peaches, and instead I used frozen peaches, which can get a little dry if you don't like reheat them enough to like draw out their juices. So I microwaved them, and it turned out pretty good. And then I made on Wednesday some chocolate chip cookies. That turned out pretty good. And then today I made my family style cinnamon roll, which turned out pretty good too, even though that nearly ended up in disaster. Because I always have a difficult time making the dough not be so shaggy, so wet, and this time it didn't quite work out. So getting the cinnamon roll onto the pizza pan led to it falling apart. So that was like, ooh. But it turned out okay. So that's that. So anyway, BookTube, I'm starting to go on some tangents and to ramble. So I'll go ahead and sign off for now. Thank you, BookTube. Have a great rest of your evening and weekend, and I will see you next week. So until then, thank you and stay safe.